Today, I want to talk for a minute about the survey, the quick survey that we did just a couple of weeks ago, and share with you some of the results of that survey, and then what some of my reflection on what some of those results are, and Lord willing, how we can continue to engage one another best as a community. First of all, thank you so much for all of you who participated. We had quite a few responders. In just a couple of days having the survey up, we had over 80 people respond to the survey, so thank you very much for your participation in that survey. As you might imagine, the first takeaway that I wanted to mention was that most people are fatigued by the pandemic up to this point. And what that means for us is keep encouraging each other. We've been doing this for a long time now. If we're talking from March to August, we have 5 months of going through this. Don't stop reaching out to one another. Don't stop reaching out because you need to hear someone else's voice. Remember, we are going through all of this together, and it's important for us to not lose track and lose sight of the fact that we are still connected to other people. So, first of all, keep encouraging each other. We need each other. Even if we're not seeing each other as often as we were previously, we need each other. So keep reaching out as much as you can. The second question, the big question about the comfort level for people to be in a social distance, social engagement with one another was an exact 50% split. It was exactly 50%. Half of our community is pretty comfortable with that sort of an interaction, and the other half of the community just isn't quite yet. And that's okay. We are all in a different place because of different circumstances in our lives. The big takeaway that I want to encourage all of you to with that knowledge is that to be mindful of your neighbor. Love and respect your neighbor. With a 50% split, the likelihood of the person standing next to you or standing 6 feet apart from you during the Divine Liturgy, the likelihood that they are thinking exactly the same way that you are about social interactions in the church is really only 50%. And so out of love and respect for your neighbor, before you engage in a hug or before you go in close contact with them, particularly after the Divine Liturgy, even if you're outside, is to ask them if they are comfortable with that. And if they are, then offer a hug. Then offer that close conversation. If they're not, try not to assume that that means that there is some sort of judgment on their part or any sort of a lack of love from them, but to understand that's just where they are right now. And that is okay. And to always err on the side of love of our neighbor. Even outside of the pandemic, I tried to make it a rule that before I went for a hug with someone, and I'm a hugger, so it was something I had to train myself to do, before going in for that hug, to actually ask permission before doing so that I am sure that that person is comfortable with it. And so use this as an opportunity to always err on the side of loving our neighbor and where they are in their comfort level in this pandemic, because it's a strange time, and wherever they are is okay. Now, since we're not offering large social gatherings in the church at this point, and Lord willing, there will come a time where we'll be able to gradually have some gatherings together, I would encourage all of us to have some type of a bubble. And by bubble, I mean a group of people that we are okay with being around. And perhaps you're not okay being around them without a mask or indoors or anything like that. But to have some people that you are okay with seeing, interacting with in an appropriate way during this time. All of us need some sort of physical interaction, in-person encounters with another person. That's just who we are as people, and that's okay. So I'd very much encourage you to have a small bubble of people that you are okay with interacting with, even if it is outdoors with masks, social distancing from one another, but to have some sort of a physical in-person encounter with someone at some point, because that's a good thing for all of us. Some suggestions have been made to me for small groups that others have been doing is perhaps inviting a couple of families to your home for an outdoor coffee hour following the Divine Liturgy after you've participated. Or perhaps even if you've participated only virtually, to have a sort of a coffee hour with one or two families outdoors at your home following the liturgy, so you're having that sort of a gathering. In addition, it's been suggested to me that when we send out in the next couple of weeks our video lessons with our discussion questions, that different groups can get together in order to have those discussions as groups together. And if you are comfortable with those small groups and are taking the appropriate precautions, then that is wonderful, a wonderful opportunity for small groups of fellowship to continue to happen within our church community, because that is very important. One of the biggest things, while taking into account the survey and the varying opinions and thoughts that people have on the pandemic, the big thing is for us to not use it as an opportunity to see those striking differences and to use it as a way to divide our church community. That's what the devil would want to take from this pandemic. For us, we need to do what we can in order to continue to unite with one another, and instead of erring on the side of judgment and frustration with others, to really err on the side of loving our neighbor and loving God above all things. And one of the ways that I'll suggest that we can do that best is to not think of this as the new normal. When we think of it as the new normal, we kind of get complacent and just say, this is the way things are always going to be. When in reality, that's not true. Things will change. Things will be different. This is not how things will be always. Things will likely be different than they were prior to the pandemic, but this is not the new normal. When we get out of that mindset, we realize, you know what? Everything that everyone is doing is simply trying to cope, simply trying to survive. And when we see our reactions as our own reactions and other people's reactions as simply hoping to cope, simply hoping to survive, we can love them much more easily because we can see and appreciate and understand where they are coming from. So again, thank you so much for responding to the survey, and Lord willing, it will be an opportunity to remind us to keep encouraging one another, to remind us to always err on the side of love, not to get caught up in judgment and bitterness and anger about what somebody else's opinion is, but to err on the side of love and respect for our neighbor, to be pushed a little bit to find some kind of a bubble to interact with socially, and to not think of this as normal. It's far from normal, and we all know it. But to know and understand that we're all just doing our best in the midst of what is, Lord willing, a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic situation. May God bring us through it together, encouraged, loving Him and loving one another more than ever before.